Hi, I'm Makayla, and this is Carson. Let's look at all the major events in women's history of 1960. On May 9th, the Food and Drug Administration approved the first oral contraceptive, commonly known as the pill, for sale as birth control in the United States. On November 1st, 1961, Women Strike for Peace, founded by Bella Abzug and Dagmar Wilson, drew 50,000 women nationwide to protest nuclear weapons and U.S. involvement in the war in Southeast Asia. On December 14, 1961, President John F. Kennedy established the President's Commission on the Status of Women. He appointed former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to chair the commission. On June 10, 1962, the Equal Pay Act of 1963 was signed into law by President John F. Kennedy. U.S. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, including the Title VII prohibition of discrimination based on sex by private employers, including employment agencies and unions. The National Organization for Women, known as NOW, was founded in 1966. NOW set up task forces to work on key women's issues. In 1968, Shirley Chisholm became the first African American woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. And now to Carson.
Thank you, my co-anchor Makayla, to who I am superior to. And now, on to topics that actually matter. In Vietnam, the U.S. objectives and concept of operation were to prevent communist domination of South Vietnam. We also fought to create in that country a viable and increasingly democratic society, and to initiate on the accelerated basis a series of mutually supporting actions of a military, political, economic, psychological, and covert character designed to achieve this objective. For roughly 10 years, the U.S. was involved in Vietnam, attempting to help South Vietnam, only to no avail. Due to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, the president now had the power to send troops into Vietnam without the consent of Congress. Because of this, many troops were sent into the dense brush and marshes of South Vietnam, and South Vietnam was full of forests and shrubbery, making it very difficult to move. After a long period of searching for the Viet Cong strongholds, which were underground, the armed forces underwent Operation Rolling Thunder to continuously bomb the Viet Cong into submission, but all attempts in this operation failed. After losing Saigon, the U.S. slowly pulled out of Vietnam, and this process was known as Vietnamization. The young vets who were lucky enough to survive, are now home getting educations and jobs to help support their families and return to a normal life. And now to Ethan with sports.
Sorry, Carson, no sports. Hello, this is Ethan Michelson reporting from Dallas, Texas, at the location of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination. On November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was visiting Dallas with the intention of easing tension between liberals and the Democratic Party. While driving through the streets, President Kennedy was fatally shot in the head and neck by assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, who was later arrested for the murder of the president. For those citizens who have been living under a rock for the past few years, Kennedy was elected president over Richard Nixon in 1961, in which Kennedy defeated Nixon in a nationally televised debate, helping secure the victory for Kennedy. While in office, President Kennedy underwent many stressful events, such as the Bay of Pigs invasion. During this time, Kennedy approved the training of Cuban exiles by the CIA in order to infiltrate Cuba, overthrow Fidel Castro's communist government, and help liberate the citizens of Cuba. This invasion failed miserably and damaged relations between the United States and other communist governments. Not long after this miserable failure from the great members of our United States government, John F. Kennedy had yet another incident with the Cubans known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. During this time, the Soviets moved their missiles into Cuba after the U.S. moved missiles into Turkey. To prevent this from occurring more, the U.S. blockaded Cuba until the U.S. and the commies came to an agreement to remove all nukes. Kennedy's domestic policy was known as the New Frontier and focused on shooting our goals in space. Now on to Makayla with other information that you will probably forget within the hour.
This is old news to the government, but new news to everyone else. After the Indonesian War and the Viet Minh defeated the French at Dien Bien Phu, the countries meeting at the Geneva Conference divided Vietnam into northern communist and southern non-communist halves. The United States supported South Vietnam due to their dedication to containing the spread of communism. In early August 1964, two U.S. destroyers stationed in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam radioed that they had been fired upon by North Vietnamese forces. In response to these reported incidents, President Lyndon B. Johnson requested permission from the U.S. Congress to increase the U.S. military presence in Indonesia. Then on August 7, 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, authorizing President Johnson to take any measures he believed necessary to retaliate and to promote the maintenance of international peace and security in Southeast Asia. This resolution has become the legal basis for the Johnson and Nixon administration's prosecution of the Vietnam.
Moving on to a more social topic of the 1960s, it was a time period of revolutionary music, where the voices of people began to spread from anti-war opinions to merely self-expression. In the early 1960s, rock and roll in its purest form was gradually overtaken by pop rock, beats, psychedelic rock, blues rock, and folk rock. Examples, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, etc. This type of music was all about expression and was created for the purpose of extending one's emotion to a larger mass of people. The country and folk influence style associated with the later half of the 1960s rock music spawned a generation of popular singer-songwriters who wrote and performed their own songs. Towards the decade's end, genres such as Baroque pop, sunshine pop, bubblegum pop, and aggressive rock, it's a lot of pop, started to grow popular, with the later two finding greater success in the following decades, like the Beach Boys. In the 1960s, there was funk and soul music rising in popularity as well. Rhythm and blues in general remained popular, and this style was commonly associated to girl groups of the times, whose fusion of R&B and gospel with rock and roll enjoyed success until the mid part of the decade. Examples, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Jackson 5. The 1960s were a great time for music, and now to Ethan with the weather.
Sorry, Carson, no weather. I'm reporting outside the White House as we cover the remarkable and unforgettable election of 1968 between Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and independent third-party candidate George Wallace. As many of you should know, Republican Richard Nixon won the election over his rivals. Due to riots and protests raging outside the Democratic National Committee over the Vietnam War, many Democrats became divided within their own party. Due to the division in the Democratic Party, many Democrats opted to vote for Nixon, a Republican, based off of their unhappiness with Lyndon B. Johnson and his decisions over the Vietnam War. Another major impact that assisted Nixon in his race for the White House presidency was the silent majority, those who did not actively protest or riot, but participated and influenced the election by voting for Nixon. Nixon ran a campaign under the slogan of law and order, promising more unity and better leadership in the United States, as well as resolving the conflict in Vietnam. Overall, third-party candidate George Wallace had little impact on the election, but still managed to win votes from several southern states, taking votes away from both Nixon and Humphrey. That is all, thank you. And remember, stay classy, America.